This is the Latin News Podcast. I'm your host, Richard McCall, here in Bogota, Colombia. It is 2026, and this is the first episode of the year. We're discussing Chile and recent events in Chile. Our very special guest on the line from Santiago is Lucía Dammert. She's a professor of international relations at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. She's also worked a lot on the topic of organized crime and has been advisor to the government of Gabriel Boric. Welcome on the Latin News Podcast.
Thank you for the invitation.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, Lucia. It's an absolute pleasure because, well, we need to discuss what has taken place recently in Chile, the elections, and why it turned into such a convincing win. I think we should start for José Antonio Kast. Where did it all go wrong for the left in Chile?
Well, first of all, President-elect Kast did a good job for almost 4 years. Is that the reality? This is the third time he runs for the presidency. The second time he actually won during the first round against President Boric. He has been doing for the last 4 years political work almost every day. And his message was a constant message based on the issues of insecurity, the issue of migration. There are very much issues that citizens in Chile think that are very important, and they're frightened about the increasing levels of insecurity and the increasing presence of migrants that are perceived to be linked to insecurity. But also, President Kast has an agenda that sounds very familiar to much of your audience, this agenda of modernization of the state, to limit the size of the state, to increase economic development, to move away from globalist issues and globalist narratives, to increase the national element of our identity. So those issues, during the last 4 years were constantly debated. And just don't forget, Richard, that during the last 4 years, we have elections every year. We have 2 constitutional referendums. We have, elections for the presidency. We have elections, internal elections. So every year we have an electoral moment. And electoral moments are those in which these topics are highly discussed. So I think that the President Kast was effective in that. And also for the candidate of the government, Janet Jara, it was very difficult, to find a good tone, because President Boric has a 30% of favored perception in the citizenship, but 70% is not really with him. So it was a difficult situation during the second run for her.
Definitely. And so 16 points ahead in the runoff. I mean, he won 58.2% against Janet Jara's 41.8% on a message that was, of course, as you said, the issue of immigration and crime. And, well, I guess we kind of need to ask, is he going to be able to carry out the promises of, did I see something about a humanitarian corridor to lead people back to, largely Venezuela, but I'm sure Cuba and Haiti are included in this as well.
Yeah, well, Latin America is highly profitable to talk about crime and migration during electoral times.
Oh, yeah.
President Kast is not the first and is not going to be the last, to increase possibilities of death penalties and building more jails and the Bukele, effect and all those issues. But right after he won, then reality started to develop, and of course he has moderated his ideas in terms of how possible it is to actually, finish with the migration crisis or to stop crime and insecurity. And let me just tell you that although crime has, increased a little bit in Chile, the main problem that we have here is that the fear of crime is really high. People are very much afraid. So there are symbolic elements of his administration that will be developed a lot, So his proposal was an emergency program for an emergency situation in Chile. But right after he won, he's kind of, talking about long-term and short-term issues. He rapidly went to Peru to try to find this corridor. But of course, in order to have a corridor, you need to have a final station, a final destination in which people will be able to leave the train, or leave the buses. And Venezuela is not that open, or it was not that open to receive all those people. But also Venezuelans here are really, looking the situation in Venezuela with some question marks. So I am not sure if that corridor will actually work. But I think that he has, he's trying to lower the expectations that he actually built during the election time.
So there'll be an opportunity for some good optics, some people leaving, some figures of this. But of course, to have that whole corridor, that would be working with Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, all the way up. I mean, can you imagine trying to tether the governments of these countries together in this sort of universal message of sending people back? And of course, we've had obviously quite an significant issues taking place in Venezuela, and we have to talk about it. But it's by no means open, and the regime, the Maduro regime or the Chavista regime, is still intact. It's not somewhere you want to return to yet. The repression is already growing on anyone who might be outspoken against the people in charge. So I doubt that Venezuelans in Chile are packing their bags just yet.
No, not in Chile nor in Peru. However, I think that, Richard, it's very important to realize that there is a corridor right now in Latin America, but it's an illegal corridor.
Yes.
It's a corridor that has moved millions of Venezuelans throughout South America, mostly throughout Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, and Chile. But that corridor is being run and organized by the illegal markets, by criminal organizations that have, in some cases, have used violence against migrants, that have moved them in different, small and medium-sized type of criminal organizations. But in order for that to work, many people and perhaps even institutions have been corrupted. Because it's not easy to move 4 million people around, Latin America without paying for the entrance, without paying for the movement. So my sense is that we really need to tackle that problem too. And it's going to be just difficult for deportees, because one idea is to move people who wants to go back to Venezuela. But the other possibility is to move people who are being deported from Chile or from Peru. And that will require police or even military force of huge dimensions. So who is going to be politically blamed if a couple of people run away in the middle of, the corridor? I don't see that policy really working well in the next 6 to 8 months.
You can't sort of reverse the corridor, the journey, and formalize it. It's all, this is where we've had the Clan del Golfo and the Tren de Aragua being very, very profitable all the way, Colombia, Chile, and beyond. So what you said something very interesting to me is that because Chile for me has always been, alongside probably Uruguay, the safest of Latin American countries. And, if we were to compare it to Colombia, which we know has all sorts of issues, or compare it to Peru or elsewhere, organized crime and so on, I guess there has been an increase. Of course, there has been an increase in crime, but is it the perception of an increase in crime as well that has been a problem?
Yeah, this is a problem that we face for almost 30 years already. Chile continues to be the safest country in Latin America in terms of homicide rates. Costa Rica and Uruguay, who were supposed to be also with us the safest, they have lowered their homicide rates in the last 5 years in a very, important way. Of course, we also increased our homicide rate, but not as fast as the others.
Yeah.
And however, during the late 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, we have more people afraid of being victims of a crime here than in Colombia. So the perception is really important.
Yeah.
What drives the perception? There are plenty of theories, but the fact is that perception of insecurity is a fertile ground for political discourses that enhances fragmentation, that enhances, discrimination and tough policies. So at the end of the matter, the migration issue has fit very well in this narrative, because nowadays we feel that in Chile, that the problem is not only crime, but it's crime being committed by irregular migrants who are part of huge criminal organizations. And of course, there are migrants who are part of, criminal organizations, but mostly in Latin America, we have small and medium-sized organizations. Cloud del Golfo and Tren de Aragua are different type of organizations that have franchises some places, but the sense that, we are building this idea that the Cartel de los Soles, of huge hierarchical organized branches type of organization that we have in Latin America. That's not true. However, here in Chile, we feel and we perceive that is true, and that moves electorate all the time.
Of course. I mean, if we were just to read out of the press, you'd think that the Tren de Aragua had taken over Chile, you would think.
Yeah.
But let's move on. Obviously, this was a major, if not the major, issue for Kast. But of course, then there's the other thing of inflation, the other topic of inflation and so on. So how can we look at José Antonio Kast, his record, and what does he think? What are his plans then to try and tackle inflation? Because the studies I've done is that Chile's economy has barely grown really, as far back as from 2014 to 2018 under the second term of President Bachelet. It's been a slow process. There's been slowdowns in there and so on. So what does Kast have up his sleeve then to rescue Chile?
Yeah, well, we need to include in that context, the estallido social. We also need to include in that context, of course, COVID. And for many years, productivity is not growing. We have a problem of productivity too. And for many years, the discourse was concentrated around social issues and social protection mechanisms. And the right wing that has lots of support by middle class and even lower class people, which is very interesting.
Yes.
They are developing they have developed this narrative of economic growth, that economic growth will allow everyone to, to move out of scarcity or to move out of debt. Because one of the problems that we have is that people really pay everything with the credit cards, and they have a very difficult situation because every month, like 70% of their salary, they have just, is indebted. So this is a problem that we all have here in Chile. And President Kast proposes the modernization of the state. Even he talked about closing some of the branches of the government that are actually, not, well, as he said, doing nothing or, wasting time, wasting public money. He has also talked about lowering taxes. We don't know exactly what type of taxes he's talking about, but the good news for him is that the economic forecast for the next 2 years is really great. Copper is in the highest possible situation in terms of price now. The economy is better off now than it was 4 years ago. That's for sure. Although there are plenty of issues that have to be tackled, there are, the macroeconomic dimensions of the economy are well established. And the state, even though, we talk about the size of the state, this is a small state. This is not Argentina or Mexico. huge state apparatus. So in order for the government to show results, I think that he will try to find alliances with Argentina and perhaps the US. He will have to work very wisely because our first economic partner is China.
Yeah.
So he will have to work very wisely in this divide between China and the US. The economic team that he has pulling together is a team that is talking about, bringing some of the money that people took away from Chile during the estallido social, allowing for more investment, national and international, lowering taxes that will allow this investment to come back. So those are the topics that they are discussing, but I'm pretty sure that in the first 4 to 6 months, we'll also see some policies or some activities that will show or will try to show more effectiveness and more efficiency in the way that the money is being used. So, cutting some programs, enhancing some ideas in terms of, the state has to be small but powerful. So those are the type of initiatives that we'll see.
You mentioned China. We have to talk about China. I don't think I go through any episode of this podcast without mentioning China. There are some very important projects, infrastructure projects, not least, I believe it's a train system near to Santiago. If I'm not mistaken. Obviously, China is a huge trading partner. How will Kast balance this with, obviously, the government of President Trump?
Yeah, China is not only, it's our first economic partner. China is also a country that is investing heavily in Peru, which is our neighbor, in terms of ports, transportation, and many other critical infrastructure areas. Here in Chile, that hasn't happened yet. China is investing in specific areas, but the defense area and other critical areas are not open for Chinese investment yet. But of course, during the last, I think, 4 to 10 years, we've been able to move in this very narrow corridor within China and the US.
Yeah.
But now that corridor with Trump is almost gone. Yeah. So and President Kast is very much aligned with this group of presidents who are, Trump and the president of Ecuador and the president of Argentina and perhaps, the president of Paraguay and others. So I think it's going to be more difficult for him to talk to China and be, like in the middle. This idea of independent autonomy, I think it's going to be contested. Yeah. But of course, China is important for Chile. But in order to be closer to the US will have to show the money, we'll have to invest here, because this idea that the hemisphere is an American hemisphere, I mean, great, but where is the investment, because China has also been very, very clever in the last 10 to 20 years in Latin America, heavily invested in specific areas, and moving not in the top layer, but also middle and even local governments with capacity and wisely. So we'll see how that works. But my sense is that Kast will be definitely in the alignment with President Trump.
So you'd think, sort of being pragmatic, he won't talk out negatively about China and permit the projects to continue, because I mean, this is what Latin America cries out for: is infrastructure, is come in and build. This is what we need. But on the outset, he might speak. He might be openly approving of Trump, and I can see where they can come into and have a should we say it, a bromance could come up over lithium, couldn't it? I mean, that could be the real, I don't know, friendship olive branch between Kast and Trump: lithium and precious minerals.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing about the future in Chile, that we have copper, we have lithium, we have rare minerals, we have, we have an opportunity, a geographic opportunity. Even though we are very much hit hard by, climate change, we have a geographic and a mineral so-called opportunity for the future. And that future should be used as a leverage to talk to both China and the US. My sense is that those areas that have been critical and there have been closed for the Chinese investments, such as defense, will continue to be closed. We have an issue with the passports, for instance, the issue of the passports. That is an area that will be closed also for Chinese investment and will continue to be closed. And I don't think that China will try to push it to change, because that is just going to be very difficult. But as you know, and as we have seen in the last 10 days, the government of the US is highly unpredictable. So we'll see, how President Trump reacts to President Kast inauguration, who is going to be sent to that inauguration moment. The symbols of the political change will be important to be seen.
I would expect someone high up in the Secretary of State, if not the Secretary of State himself. I mean, I will expect
to be here. That will be an important, an important element of the relationship between Chile and the US. Chile has always played an important role in the international arena, that arena that has been dismantled. But in the UN, we have a candidate for the Secretary General of the UN. There are several geostrategic things that we have a role. And we, in many moments, Chile was able to represent the voice of Latin America. Even though now Latin America has not only one voice, perhaps the Secretary of State sees an opportunity to be here in Chile in March. We'll see.
I think so. I think could we suggest that maybe Chile, with all of its precious minerals and all of this opportunity, could be negotiating from a position of some power? I mean, not power, strength, when it comes to playing off China and the United States?
Well, it's very difficult because, even though we have all those minerals, we are in a small country, far from, the US, far from China, very much, in the southern part of the world. We don't have, we do have an important defense capacity, but that defense capacity is for the southern part of Latin America. It's not, we are not a major player, but I think that we have an economic and a commercial capacity to discuss. We are not a country with weak institutions. We have an important state. We have also, although we have, the right wing and the left wing, we have a political realm that continues to be very much certain, Populism is growing, but it's not growing as fast as in other parts of the world. So I think that's the strength of Chile. And I'm pretty sure that if President Kast goes to the US, we'll go with people from the left-wing parties, the state will participate in much of the international decisions, because foreign affairs decisions in Chile have always been, since 1990, state decisions, not government decisions.
And he's not going to break from that. It's a tradition.
I don't see that coming. I mean, the only opportunity for that to come is that if there is an invasion of a Latin American country, or something of that nature, but I don't see it now. And let me tell you that as soon as President Maduro was taken out of Venezuela, President Boric was very much against it, and President-elect Kast had the first reaction was to be in favor of the U.S. policy or the U.S. action, but just very, very fast he said, well, now the president is President Boric. I will not continue to give my opinions. And I think that is a very good signal of how things will be moving here in Chile. Or perhaps this is, the positive part of my brain who is working.
Well, we need to be positive, don't we? And we need to think about these things, whether you like it or not. In March, he'll be inaugurated. And despite not enjoying a majority and so on, it seems that, as you said, the economy will be in a very favorable position, which will allow him to enact and certainly carry through some of his election promises. I'm thinking, because it's the first episode of 2026, it would be nice to put some comparisons in here. Everybody's and analysts are always so fast to start talking about, the final nail in the coffin of the pink tide that overtook Latin America some years ago, and now it's all swinging right. And this, of course, with José Antonio Kast in Chile, is just another example of this. How do you feel, as a professor of international relations there in Chile, looking at and obviously working very deeply in organized crime? How do you feel that the continent is moving?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say, because there are some political discussions now in Latin America that we call them right wing or left wing. But at the end of the matter, the definition is more populist type of movements. And this is not what happened in Chile, though. But, in some instances, I think populism is something that describes better some of the government rather than left wing or right wing. And some of the candidates, too, take a look at what is happening in Peru, for instance, right now with all those candidates. My sense is that, in fact, after COVID, a huge change happened throughout Latin America. There is an increasing presence of illegal markets. Those illegal markets have grown from informality, an economic informality that is really huge. The states that are not capable, in fact, to answer some of or most of people's desires and needs. And for that reason, the whole narrative of the left wing that was centered around social protection and, liberal ideas have kind of lost its feet. So as in the US with the Democrats, my perception is that the center left part of the Latin American political spectrum is trying to figure out its main political objective now, because people are requiring more state capacity to fight organized crime, more police power, capacities to deport people, close the frontiers. Those are, and I think we have to take that into account, those are the desires of most Latin Americans. And those desires are very far from desires of social inclusion. Are social inclusion lost? No, I don't think those issues are lost. They are not as central as before. So I think that in the next, perhaps 5 years, we will see how the center left try to regain the agenda. I'm certain that the center left will lose the battle if continues trying to figure out what to do with crime and insecurity, because our societies still, have or face multiple challenges in terms of inequality, poverty, really poor health programs, educational issues, so on and so forth. But those issues, very strangely, and you can see that, Richard, even in Colombia, are kind of disappearing from the electoral debate.
Yeah.
So that happened here in Chile, and almost no one talked about the crisis of education. We only focus on crime and insecurity and migration. So I think this is a phase. I'm pretty sure that most of the governments, such as what happened with Novoa in Ecuador, as soon as they try to move the state machinery, the state machine, they will figure out that they have to do much more in order to fight crime. And crime is only, an image of how deteriorated state-society relations are.
Well, thank you so much for that. And as we close this down then, Lucia, which has been fascinating, not only to think of the region as a whole, obviously in the wake of events in Venezuela and the Southern Caribbean, but also if we could just look finally at Chile again. So you
Sure.
seem to be positive. You're positive. That's what I'm getting the feeling. Positive for the next few years under José Antonio Kast.
Well, my sense is that, democracy is a good system. It's not the best system, but it's a good system. And this time, President Kast won. Really, his message was well received. It's not that no one voted for him. He got a good result. He has clear ideas. People voted for those ideas, but he has also been very key in defining that he will work with and govern with the Congress, that, there is no debate about the rule of law. There is no debate about, human rights. There is no debate about central issues that nowadays in other parts of the world are being debated, and are being put into question marks. So, and my sense also is that this defeat will open the door for the center left to have a finest, more profound definition of their goals for citizen, and perhaps, will rebirth with a better understanding of how to win the next election. Because don't forget that in the last 6 years in Chile, President Boric won. Then you have a constitutional reform that was left wing that lose. Then you have a constitutional referendum that was right wing that lose. So people are moving from one part to the other very quickly. So this right wing wave could last some time, but you never know.
Well, it's nice to hear positive news. It's nice to hear that you think that things are going to go well. It's a great way of starting the year here on the Latin News podcast. Let me take this moment to say Lucía Dammert is a professor of international relations at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. Thank you so much for your time and for your knowledge on these subjects and sharing them with us.
Thank you for the invitation. Good to see you.
It has been an absolute pleasure. This has been the first episode of the Latin News podcast this year, 2026. Plenty going on in the continent at the moment. And of course, please remember to subscribe to the Latin News podcast so that you never miss out on any of the episodes. We'll be back in a fortnight discussing more issues and topics from the region. I've been Richard McCall in Colombia. Goodbye.